just for the thrill. I saw a lot of Brazilians, thousands, possibly millions. I ignored the electric bill just for the thrill. When the lights went out in Georgia, my wife said... Good evening, colleagues, across town and across the globe. This is Paul Colby. I is Paul Colby. And this is Public Affairs, Public Access. And I'm coming to you tonight, that is to say April 18, 2019 for historians, because things are really going down in our big national structure today. And by national structure, I'm talking about the United States government and its job of producing reports about things going on around here, namely the Mueller report. At long last, we Americans get to have a look-see at what was going on for the last couple of years, and it has been pretty provocative. The Mueller report. Normally, I wouldn't be here tonight, but I came into a copy of the Mueller report some time ago, and I have to tell you that what you've been looking at today, if you've been staring at the TV screen, is not the real Mueller report. The secret Mueller report, I like to call it, is something that looks completely different. And when I say looks completely different, let me show you the real cover page to the report you've been hearing about today. Pretty bizarre thing, isn't it? Well, first of all, you're probably asking yourself, what is that? I'll tell you what that is. It's the secret Mueller report, but I already did say that. The background is this. When the report came to our new Attorney General Barr, he said, you know, we're going to have to translate this thing into English. He didn't know it was written, so to speak, in the form that you are going to see here tonight, because I'm going to be going through the pages of the report with you, the secret pages, and I'm going to be showing you what really went down. Now, why do we have this strange-looking numerological graphic orientation to information? Is it some sort of secret NSA artificial intelligence protocol? Well, maybe. I don't think so. Is it some kind of ancient language that only Robert Mueller and a few of his pals know about, so they wanted to keep it close to the vest, if you will? That might be true, but it is more likely, I think, that there are some extraterrestrial entities that are pretty interested in what is in that report and what Robert Mueller found out. What am I trying to tell you? Well, you know that we saw a lot of UFOs and whatever we want to call them now, the unidentified aerial phenomena, when we started making atomic bombs and then H-bombs. Apparently, I am told that some alien presences said to some American personnel, probably high-ranking officials in the military or in the government, that this just can't be tolerated. But things calmed down for a few decades, 40 or 50 years actually, and then along came Donald J. Trump. And apparently the alien entities who were worried about what's going on in this kind of reality said, what on earth is going on? We thought you guys had come to your senses. Anyway, that's the story that was given to me. And bottom line, I can tell you that I was schooled in what is actually in the pages of the secret Mueller report, and that's what I want to share with you tonight. I'm going to go through lots of it. I can't get to all of it because, as you are being told, it's more than 400 pages long. And so you're not going to get everything from me tonight, but what you do get is likely to be enlightening. Two parts of the report, as you have probably been told. Part one is about the Russians interfering or attempting to in our elections in 2016. And part two is obstruction of justice by the Trumpster man. So let's go to the top and run through some highlights. One of the first things that you will be made aware of is the activities of the Internet Research Agency. I want you to go to page 22, if we've got that. Page 22, there you go. The Internet Research Agency is the Soviet disinformation group that is responsible for a lot of the campaign flack that we were subjected to over the last couple of years. And you already knew that if you've been watching the indictments come down one at a time. But let me tell you some background about this. According to this document, and I'm translating it for you, the Internet Research Agency started off being a pretty normal, well, I can't say normal, but a pretty harmless group. What they originally were doing was trying to use some research to find out where the Internet is or was. They thought it was probably somewhere near Fort Walton Beach in Florida. And then they were told that it's actually someplace in Utah. That's what you're seeing here. And then they were told, no, it's really been hidden away in New Jersey. So in the beginning, apparently, the Internet Research Agency was doing research about where the Internet was. And in the process of doing that, they found out about social networks, namely Facebook and Twitter. That's what you're seeing here on page 38, that they discovered social media and said, well, dadgummit, we could probably make some use of this because we could pretend to be Americans and we could get inside the heads of Americans by playing along with this social media convention that's going on there. They thought it was actually a convention because that's what they read, the social media convention. Anyway, they figured out that Facebook and Twitter were being used to keep Americans hooked up together, and people could go there and get in line with their own echo chamber and hear the news they wanted to use. How do you like that, the news they wanted to use? Well, here on page 51, you can see that Mueller reports that the Russians that were involved here used a lot of aliases. They were actually members of Russian military intelligence. They were, you know, they had their real names, but they knew better than to put Egmial Vorsinski on their Facebook page or their Twitter account, because that would be giving things away. So instead they use aliases like Happy Cornflake. And I think I've received some email from Happy Cornflake. And Oligarchs Are Us. That was another popular moniker that they use. And Steamy Daniels. You can see what they did is they tried to sound like they were just one of the gang passing along cake news. And in the beginning, that's what it was. It was about how to make a pineapple upside down or something like that. And then it turned into a bunch of social commentary. You're looking here at page 77 talking about this. And in the report, Mueller says that these guys, and it's almost all, you know, males, these guys were sowing dissent. And he goes into great detail. He talks about the kind of sewing machines that they used. They didn't completely understand, if you get my drift here, they didn't quite know what they were doing, but they were sowing dissent. They used, well, I think I had one of these machines that he identified, but they tried out several machines before they figured out that they should use a mouse and a keyboard to actually do the text. And that's how they started sowing dissent. It's a really fascinating look at what goes on inside that kind of an operation. It goes into considerable detail about how the GRU was tracking and targeting the Clinton campaign. Now, first of all, I want to tell you, in case you don't know what GRU is, it's in Russian, and it should not be confused with the GRU that played just recently in the March Madness contest, you know, and defeated Altered State. It's an arm of Russian military intelligence, okay? GRU. I'm not going to try to translate it for you right now. But what they did is stole documents. They stole documents, and this is explained here on page 133. They stole a bunch of documents from both the Democratic National Convention and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. As a result of stealing these documents, and this is really fascinating, they learned the favorite colors of more than 26 million Democrats. And can you imagine how powerful you would be if you knew the favorite colors of all of these voters across America? I'm talking about 48 states on the continent and also Alaska and Hawaii. And it was really remarkable, the favorite colors of some of the Alaskans. It was pretty boring, the colors favored by the Hawaiians. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. There were also, you'll recall, talk about Pizzagate. It turns out that the Russians found many, many secret pizza recipes in the files of the Democratic Party, in their voter-based files. Now, this story, of course, is like one of the many that got confused when the press started talking about it. So what Pizzagate was really about was this huge treasure trove of recipes. These included, I was moved by this discovery, and I had to try out a tuna artichoke pizza this evening on my way over to the studio. And there are several more that I'm going to try. There's a dirt pizza, and we'll get into dirt a little bit more in a minute. And there are some pork belly pizzas that you probably have never seen in an actual pizza establishment here in the country, but that's what they found out. Now, let's talk about another aspect of this situation, and that is WikiLeaks and the so-called Guccifer 2.0. These were the, this is covered on page 88 there, as you see. Guccifer, it turns out, is the so-called stealer or purger or hijacker, if whatever term you like, of the Podesta emails. And in the Podesta emails, there was a whole lot of stuff that embarrassed the Democratic Party, especially the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. For example, there was the time that Podesta and his associates had arranged to turn off all of the water at the Trump Hotel Borscht. This caused a lot of the guests to be without showers and without drinking water. It was a real mess. There was the other time that they went out to the Mar-a-Lago golf course and did some dirty business, and I'll get to that in a minute because that's done in great detail. You know that what the Podesta arm of the party was doing was trying to paint Bernie Sanders as some sort of a religious weirdo. They were planning stories that he worshiped an old tiki sort of god, somewhere in rural New Jersey. I'm not even sure where that is, but this is page 55, where they are describing this operation, and it really embarrassed Mr. Podesta. There was also a huge number of things, actually, that embarrassed Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She was responsible for the debate schedule of the Democrats, and here on page 312, you see a description of how she arranged for debates in the early stages when it wasn't just Bernie and Hillary Clinton. She actually arranged to have some lemurs come up out of the audience to be on the podiums, or podii, I guess would be the plural, and then some other unidentified ostrich-looking birds, and then a guy who didn't actually speak English, and a guy who looked like he might be the janitor of the building when they had it at the University of Piedmont. You remember that? Well, anyway, it turns out that it was really the Russians, the GRU, not Mr. Guccifer, who were planting all of these stories in WikiLeaks files, so that WikiLeaks could release them. And this is where it gets pretty deep. On page 401, there is a discussion of how Roger Stone was sending, I guess, maybe using UPS or FedEx or something to send tuna sandwiches to Julian Assange on an almost daily basis. And maybe also pork belly sandwiches, if I remember the way it reads. So it was really a confusing spectacle, but it turns out that everything that WikiLeaks had, including the map of the old railroad yard, came from the GRU, all right? The old railroad yard here on page 244 is a place where Trump apparently went to college. He often says that he went to the Wharton School, but he actually spent those 4 or 5 years, because it took him a while to get out of college, at this old deserted railway yard. And Julian Assange, of course, posted the pictures of it, but it turns out that wasn't actually a deserted railroad yard. It was oh yeah, that's right. It was a tuna sandwich farm. My teacher may have goofed up on this, because he told me it was definitely about a tuna sandwich farm, but I still find that hard to believe. Anyway, we're talking about the Russians and what they tried to do to pilfer votes or to shift votes around in our election, and that next comes to their meetings with Russians, because you'll remember that Trump was trying to build a brand new drive-in hotel that was going to be in Moscow. The idea was that you had to drive in, sort of like a drive-in theater. You parked your car, and then you went to what looked like a concession stand, and underground there was a 75-story hotel, underground. Anyway, it was going to be expensive. That's what it says here on page 228. It was going to be very expensive, so Trump had to kind of grease the wheels to keep this project live, if you know what I'm saying. So what he did, he gave $50 to the Leningrad Tap Dance Academy. That was before the Russian acts were appearing on MTV and YouTube. In the very earliest days of MTV, when it actually had music, and before YouTube was turning, all of the political campaigns into music. Anyway, that $50 got him a long way, and then his buddy, this is on, I think, page 414, his buddy Felix Sater made some porta-cans available at one of the big Russian music festivals. And that was a music festival that featured an artist who's going to come up later in this discussion. That's Kellyanne Conway Twitty, who had several big hits, and she was headlining the music fest. So the porta-cans turned out to be very important because the GRU, while arranging all sorts of things, including their penetration of the music industry, had not arranged for those kind of accommodations. So that's what was being done to grease the wheels for the Trump under the concession stand hotel project at the drive-in. And it was still going on as Mr. Cohen reported. It was still going on when Trump was elected. Now, the first time that people were really getting wind of the depravity that was involved here in some of these shenanigans was when Mr. Papadopoulos showed up after discussing things with a guy close to the Soviet Academy of Perfume. And in the report here at page 31, they use the code name Papadocument for Mr. George Papadopoulos. Anyway, he was told that the GRU had dirt on Clinton, and so he asked what kind of dirt. And apparently they told him it was mostly clay, but there was some silt, and there was a lot of gravel. That's covered on page 79. So what happened here was that as they searched for this dirt that they were going to use on Clinton, they discovered, and it's not clear, I can't really break the code down, who discovered the Trump washateria network, because Trump apparently has a big chain of washaterias across the United States, and most of them don't actually take dirt off. Anyway, whatever that means. Now, another exciting part of the report, it's already pretty famous, is what's called the Carter page. That's page 102. The Carter page says that Carter Page, not to be confused with Jimmy Carter Page, was in Moscow, and he says what he told the investigators was that he had gone to Mexico and then to Moscow because he was searching for the perfect tuna for some sandwiches. And while there, he gave speeches. Now, I'm talking about Moscow now. He gave speeches on the role of pond lizards in truth-loving countries. It's not clear which truth-loving countries he meant there, but Carter Page, there was an intelligence agency watchdog that was very interested in Jimmy Carter Page, and they had the two confused for a while there. But the biggest thing that came up with the Ruskies was the Trump Tower meeting. Now, you may remember from our coverage in our own news networks that on an airplane, Trump Sr. dictated an explanation for why there was a meeting going on that involved Trump Jr. and Russian attorneys close to the Kremlin, and also that was set up by a music publicist who had worked with Kellyanne Conway Twitty. It turns out that the outreach to Jr. was actually from a former Miss Universe or Miss University. We're not sure about that. And Jared Kushner was invited to the meeting on the assumption that he would be able to speak French. I'm not sure why, but it was important to have someone there speaking French. What they wanted to introduce, and this involves Jared Kushner very closely, was to introduce a black channel to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, and this is covered on page 66. The the purpose of this black channel is not real clear, but we are assuming that it's not like a music channel on YouTube. It's for something else. I'm still working on that part for you. But then, the next engagement with the Russians, as you maybe you remember this, Ambassador Kiss-Me-Back had a big talk with Jeff Sessions. Now, both of them later tried to explain this away. They said they just got together, you know, for cauliflower cocktails. I'm not sure what that is, at the hotel on the first day of the Republican convention, and it just so happened that Ambassador Kiss-Me-Back said it would really be nice if the U.S. would pull out of Montana. Now, it's not clear if the Russians had plans to buy Montana or had set up a special black channel there or what they were doing, but the talk about Montana was very sensitive because Jeff Sessions had promised Americans that he was not from Montana. And it turns out he wasn't really from Montana, but he said that he had originally gone to college in Manafort, or Manaport. It turns out Manaport is one of the places from which a lot of food products were being shipped to Julian Assange. A lot of food products, because I'll tell you the truth, I've eaten at the Ecuadorian embassy myself, and after about a week of that, I mean, you are looking for something else to eat. And that's it turns out that all of this dialogue with Julian Assange came to the fore because he was hungry and he had not had a hot dog in in months. Let's just put it that way, in months. Anyway, we know of another gentleman named Paul Manafort, and we don't know if he was named after the fort or if the fort was named after him, but he had a history of ties to Russia. Now, he had some of the red ties like I have, but he also had paisley and plaid ties. He had every kind of tie that we know about. And it is said in the secret report on page 28, it is said that he joined the Trump campaign because Trump said he needed a translator. Trump really had, problems with the English language. Allegedly, he has a vocabulary of about 500 words, but that means that he can't read a lot of the more complicated things crossing his desk. And Mr. Manafort said that he could read them. He could read them, and he would be happy to. So he was with the campaign for a while. We know that at a certain point he left. And according to the secret report on page 407, he left because he was going to open a Ukrainian restaurant. Now, I don't know if you've been to a Ukrainian restaurant lately, but I wouldn't be eating there on a regular basis. I can tell you that. So that pretty much covers what was going on with the Russians, and that's all in part one of both the report that you will see and the secret report that I'm telling you about right now that has the real story. Part two, of course, is focusing more on obstruction of justice. Now, the first thing you have to understand here is a whole question revolving around executive privileges, that's plural, and whether or not the president was going to claim executive privileges. Apparently, Donald Trump thought that one of these privileges was to obstruct justice. But some of his some of his workforce didn't think that was exactly true, and so Trump would give certain orders and they wouldn't be carried out. For example, Trump apparently told several people, including McGahn, the in-house counsel, that he wanted all of the horses removed from the White House grounds instantly. Well, if you're like me, you are kind of curious to know which horses, because you don't often see pictures of horses on the grounds of the White House. At least I haven't. But it might have been spirit horses or the memory of horses that Donald Trump was talking about. But then things got even funnier. He then instructed some of his aides to drain a certain swamp in Washington, D.C., and his aides said that they would do it, but then they ignored the request because they found out that they were already in a swamp. It was a renamed swamp, so they didn't carry out his orders there. At one point, in-house counsel McGahn was, according to the report you see today, he was told to remove the special counsel. But in the secret report, we see on page 17 that he was really asked to move the special counsel. And apparently he was trying to move the special counsel from the Washington, D.C. area to someplace in Cincinnati. And this is apparently where there was a pizza restaurant that the president was trying to infiltrate. He said that there were 30,000 emails about this particular pizza restaurant in Cincinnati, and of course nothing came of that either. But let's go to some stuff that you do know about. There was the issue with Admiral Flynn, and this is what involved James Comey and Trump in their first big to-do before Mr. Comey was shown the door, so to speak. Now, if you go back in history, you'll recall that Admiral Flynn had secret talks with that Ambassador Kiss Me Back. And those talks were apparently about importing motorcycles from the Soviet Union to compete with American motorcycles, and then to undo that and replace them all with Chinese motorcycles to confuse the Chinese as part of the ongoing trade negotiations. I never have understood that, but according to the secret report on page 44, Donald Trump said to James Comey, "I want you to lift the clouds." And what is odd about this is that Mr. Comey went back to talk to some friends at the FBI, and he said, "Do we have any heavy equipment that can lift these clouds over the president?" And apparently there were some cumulus clouds over the White House. They looked suspicious because they had been there for 14 or 15 days, and nobody could move the clouds. So he said, "Can you lift these clouds?" And what the FBI found out when Comey gave them this question was that there was a problem with some motorcycles. Motorcycle exhaust was causing this buildup of cumulus clouds, and nobody could seem to lift them. So there was a call for some kind of new equipment that could, and at a point, James Comey just came back to the president and said, "No, we can't lift these clouds. You're going to have to try to, dissipate them on your own." Well, next thing you know, Mr. Comey gets fired. And then the next thing you know, Mr. Trump is on television telling the networks that he had always planned to fire James Comey. And the first thing he said was that he fired James Comey because he smelled funny. that's what you heard. In the secret report on page 21, it says that Mr. Comey was fired because his car had an oil leak. And every time he would come over and park at the White House, that he would leave behind this puddle of oil and then a streak of oil. And at some point, the president said, well, if it isn't the damn clouds that he can't lift, then it's this damn oil leak that he doesn't clean up. Finally, though, the president, a few months later, revealed to one of his aides that he had actually fired Jim Comey because he used too many big words. And now that Mr. Manafort was gone, he didn't have a translator, and he didn't know what some of these words meant. Like, for example, obstruction. You know, he was always confused about what this obstruction is, and he used to say, we haven't had any collisions, and then he would slip up in public. A couple of times he called them collusions. You know, the collisions between the motorcycles and the horses there at the White House. But one day he slipped up and he called it not a collision, but a collusion. And then since he had said it in public, he kept repeating it over and over and over. All right, it gets even more confusing or more revealing depending on your perspective, because after Comey left, Trump told Corey Lewandowski to tell Jeff Sessions, to tell Ambassador Kiss-Me-Back, to tell the motorcycle manufacturers to stop bugging him about Montana because it was going to remain an American state. And as far as I know, it still does remain an American state. So things were getting very confusing there. And what happened is the special counsel was appointed because of all of this business. The special counsel was appointed, and Trump, as you are reading in the so-called official report today, Trump said, oh no, this is the end of my presidency. Well, according to the secret report, here on page 16, you see that originally the president seemed, he was being taped as you know, he suspected. He was being taped, and it was misunderstood by the people surveilling him. They thought that the president said, oh no, this is the end of my pregnancy. And that caused them to really rethink what was going on. They had no idea that he was pregnant, but they eventually were able to figure out that he had said, this is the end of my residency. Now, the reason it was the end of his residency is he was planning to leave and move to California to a sanctuary city. And this was on the advice of one of his counselors, the director of pretended religious affiliation. Now, that director told Trump that he would look a whole lot better on the news coverage if he pretended to be religious. So the original concept was that he would change his residence to a sanctuary city in California, because in California he knew there would be plenty of golf courses and orange juice. That was very important because he had a fondness for orange, along with about 12 million Democrats. We know that orange was their favorite color. Now, when the intelligence community stood their grounds, and said there was definitely a role in the 2016 election campaign by the GRU and Putin's goons because they wanted to see Trump elected, he barreled his way into history by saying, no, no, he had talked to Putin, I'm saying Donald Trump, had talked to Putin, and Putin was vigorous in denying that he had bet serious money on the Super Bowl. Well, that really wasn't an answer for a lot of people, but what's curious is that right here, you see it in the secret report on page 83, it says Putin and the Russians really did not prefer Donald Trump. In fact, their favorite candidate, his name was Morris Shelby, I believe. But Morris Shelby was not only not running for president in either of the two main parties, he wasn't even among the living anymore. He had a large following because he used to speak with fondness of certain pond lizards that lived and worked with him somewhere in New Jersey, seemingly in a washateria in New Jersey. But as I say, he wasn't actually running for president, so the Russians decided to take somebody else on. Now, what really irritated Trump about the Russian angle was the so-called stool dossier. And one thing you probably have heard before is that there were some videos that seemingly existed that would have been problematic for the president to explain. And even Michael Cohen, his fixer, made some effort to find the videos referred to in the stool dossier. Now, on page 23, once again, the real Mueller report says that what was supposed to be in this video, in the stool dossier, was a video of someone pooping on the green. I don't know if it was the 15th or the 16th hole at Mar-a-Lago, and the president said, we need to find this video and we need to edit it. Nobody could ever find that video, so that's a kind of a dead-end story, but it's an important story because it turns out the stool dossier was not financed by the Clinton campaign, but instead by some motorcycle manufacturers in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, and they had a grudge with Mr. Putin and his current cabinet officers, and that's why they made this video. And it was apparently fake. It was starring one of those up-and-coming singers. I think I've mentioned before, Kellyanne Conway Twitty. Now, before I get too far off the subject here, there was a statement. There was a statement from Mr. Mueller about why they had not actually charged the president with anything in terms of obstruction of justice, and that was because the Department of Justice had a standing practice of not indicting a sitting president. And apparently, in the old days, it said I'm going back a couple of administrations where it says you can't indict a golfing president. So now, if you will think back to all of the pictures you've seen of Donald Trump, you realize that in most of them, he's standing, even when he's signing a document, especially when he's making a speech, anytime that he is outside of the White House, because then he wouldn't be sitting. And as long as he's not sitting, according to the secret report, that means that he can't be indicted. I don't think any of us would agree with that, but that's the way it is. There's also discussion, as you see in in the redaction segment of this report, there was a whole lot of discussion by Mr. Barr about what he would have to redact, okay? And this is covered in more detail on page 213. Yeah, there you go. On page 213 of the secret report, you'll see that there is a discussion of both sources and methods. Now, one thing you know is that Mr. Barr had 4 so-called categories for redacting things, one of which is to protect sources and methods. But he also, just for the record here, he also had a policy of not producing any information that came from people with a fondness for lizard ponds. Excuse me, pond lizards. And we'll get into that a little bit more if I have time. But anyway, as for sources and methods, first of all, think about the sources. One thing I know from looking at the very secret report is that one of the sources whose information has been redacted from the report is the Cake News editor, Buzz Conquistadorman, right there. Buzz Conquistadorman has a long history of working with Republican candidates, mostly in translating their documents into simple English, because a lot of them use language that is not understandable. I've already mentioned the director of pretended religious affiliation and everything that came from the director of pretended religious affiliation has been edited out of the report you have seen. Also, there's the Russian mobster liaison, Mr. Curly LeBoom. There are quite a few redactions that are based on testimony that Curly LeBoom gave to the grand jury. We don't know what's in there because it's all missing from the report. But the other one that I can identify right away as one of the sources who's not present in the so-called report is Tina Weenie, the CIA's multi-pronged attack dog. And you've seen her in a lot of previous engagements doing a lot of things that are borderline equal to sabotage. Borderline equal to sabotage. Now that's an example of some of the sources that you won't be able to read anything they said in the current report, but it's fascinating that in the secret report they detail what some of the methods are. So anytime you're talking about the intelligence community, as you are here on page 17, what are some of these methods that they talk about? Well, one is obfuscation. That's one of the methods they use. And I think a lot of us in private life use that. Another one is called brutal honesty. That's when they tell somebody, you are a lying sack of, I don't think I can say that, and they say, we already have a video of that. For example, that's what was done with the video of somebody pooping on the green, the 16th green at Donald's golf course. Another method that they use, pillow talk. Pillow talk. Now, a lot of you think pillow talk is, you know, little sexy exchanges between lovers, but this is something new that the intelligence community uses. They plant pillows in people's beds, and these pillows, while people are sleeping, these pillows start talking, and it scares the hell out of a lot of these people, not knowing that their pillow is actually a CIA device, a method, if you will. And then another one, I can't really wrap my head around this. Chipmunk jokes are supposed to be among the most dangerous methods employed by our intelligence community. And incidentally, by the way, did you know that the Secret Service has a code name for the president? You know, all presidents have code names, and Donald Trump's is Mr. Bogey. And speaking of bogeys, I want to go back. This is something covered on page 119. This is fascinating to me. You'll remember that when Donald Trump fired James Comey, that Sarah Sanders told the press corps that she had been receiving phone calls all day from people that were at the FBI and that said, "Thank God you got rid of this guy. He is such a creep and a lowlife," and, you know, words like that. Well, it turns out she didn't, because Mueller asked her for her phone records. And so at first she turned over the phone records, and they saw that there were no actual calls, voicemails recorded on her phone. And so she told them, "Well, I don't actually speak on the phone, I just use sign language." And they thought, well, that's not good enough. And she said, "Well, I got to tell you the truth. I didn't actually talk to FBI agents on the phone. In fact, I talked to our gardener here at the White House, Mr. Ray Diphthong, who told me that he had always wanted to be an FBI agent." So that I figured that was pretty close and that there were more like him. So therefore, I could say, you know, and I talked to some Dairy King customers. That's what she said. And that's why she based that statement on phantom people, not real authorities, not anybody she actually talked to. One of the, and say we're almost running out of time here, so I can't get to very much more, but I want to tell you one of the things that you will find in the report, and here I just mean the regular report that you have seen, is that Special Counsel Mueller referred 14 cases to other district courts and so forth. Now, and that's, of course, that's bad news for the president. But what is missing from the official report is any idea of what those might be, but it is covered in the secret report. On page 93, it mentions some of these cases. One of them is in a district court in New Jersey. They are looking at a scandal involving some washaterias that don't actually work. I mean, they don't have any water, and it appears that somebody, maybe a Democrat, maybe John Podesta and his group, or Hillary Clinton herself, and 30,000 of her close friends, turned off the water at this washateria, or these washaterias in New Jersey. That's the substance of one of these lawsuits. One of these court actions. Another one in Philadelphia has to do with somebody, and I think that means Donald Trump, selling bogus tickets to the Kellyanne Conway Twitty concert that was going to be held near the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, and she was going to sing some of her new hit records, and they're about hits, you know, like Russian mobster kind of hit jobs. But apparently they were selling these tickets, but they weren't real tickets. They were all counterfeit, bogus tickets. So that's not any good. Another of the actions that Mueller referred is going to be heard in Dallas, and this involves attempts to infiltrate the cast of Saturday Night Live. For what purpose? Well, who knows? I don't know, and I doubt if you know. we could probably go on all night, but I want to leave you with one thought. The president, in the top secret report, you know, he's asked a lot of questions in the take-home exam, and a lot of times, if you are asked a question, an attorney will tell you to say, you don't have any specific recollection, no specific recollection of what is involved in the question. And unusually, the president's first question was, what is your name and what is your age? And the president's answer to that question was, I have no specific recollection. So that just tells you, ladies and gentlemen, what we're up against. And I think you can see that if I hadn't brought you the news behind the news, then you would still be swallowing the garbage that's going to be presented to you in the days to come. But now you're equipped. Now you're equipped with information that somebody made up and passed along to Robert Mueller. And you have the benefit of my intervention to keep that report from being turned down as secret. And for all of the alien entities out there who demanded to be able to see these things for themselves in their own language, in words or graphic images they could understand, well, boys, we've intercepted that communication, so we know you're out there, and we hope that you're on our side, because it's pretty clear that some of the people in this government today aren't working for you. Until I have another chance to be with you under calmer conditions, I just want to say, buckle up, sleep tight, and don't drink the water. Good night.
Picture yourself and 213 of your close friends on a slow boat to China. The suit that you're wearing has cantaloupe stains. Yuck. And suddenly, someone is serving you papers. And who knows what he has for brains? I certainly do not. Incidentally, over there by the Statue of Libertines, is that a bird or a plane or something else entirely? I think the announcer knows. It's Lucy in the sky with Dobermans. No doubt about it. That's Lucy in the sky, and I forget all of their names, but those are the Dobermans. They went to night school together. You haven't met Lucy? I'll tell you what, if you can stick around till halftime, I know some of the boys backstage. Picture yourself in a top-loading washer. Pretty tight in there, huh, sport? Your friends are all watching you and they're guzzling the sauce. Suddenly, someone is proffering handcuffs. And just between you and me and whoever else wants to know, she bears a striking resemblance to somebody we both know well. That's right. You mean Lucy? It's Lucy in the sky with Dobermans. Well, he took the words right out of my mouth. Dobermans. That's Lucy, and did you know that she makes all those clothes herself? I wouldn't kid you about that. Say, be careful, you're gonna spill your Virgin Mary, and that's not gonna make a good impression on all of these illiterati here. Picture yourself in a compromising situation involving dozens of violations of several federal statutes, and your attorney pleads guilty and asks for the chair. Suddenly, and I mean quick, there's lynch mobs gathering on the street, and you want to tell somebody in authority that it just doesn't seem fair. Well, maybe it doesn't, but the only person I'd want to talk to is Lucy in the sky with Dobermans. Well, he said it again. I can't say it any better. Look, that reminds me. Lucy and I'll have to be heading for Manhattan pronto. That's right, the Doberman